so much. Now we're going to call up Dr. Collins once again, and he is going to speak on who was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. As he makes his way, I have to ask Dr. Collins, is there maybe I should save this for the Q&A, but is there like a traditional archaeology getup that you wear for, you know what I'm saying? Like, is there...
Of course.
That guy's an archaeologist.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think I have about like 8 or 10 Indiana Jones hats. In fact, one of them actually has the official Indiana inside, the official Indiana Jones hat. So, yeah. So I do that. And the vest, Indiana Jones didn't wear a vest. He wore a leather jacket, but I promise you, excavating the southern Jordan Valley is a little too warm for that. But I do have the leather jacket, too. And I have a whip. No, I do. I do. One of my pastor friends in Albuquerque gave that to me for my birthday. He said, "You need a whip." So here it is. So we have a lot of fun with that. But yes, I mean, the hat is, you got to have a hat, right? Especially if you're bald like me. So you got to have the hat. And then the vest is great because you put all your stuff and it's great. So that's kind of the look. And every time you see people talking about archaeology in the Bible, they usually wear that getup. And all right, we're going to talk about something that is another one of my sort of pet research projects, and that is, who's the Pharaoh of the Exodus? Now, I have a book back there on the table called Let My People Go. The subtitle is Using Historical Synchronisms to Identify the Pharaoh of the Exodus. You need that book. It will clarify everything you need to know about this subject. It's very detailed. It's not written as a popular book or narrative. It's pretty stiff, academic, documented stuff. If you have insomnia, take it to bed with you. Try to read a page a night, and you'll be out pretty quick. But I'm hearing by more and more scholars, and by the way, books and papers now are being written on it, and so people are starting to get the idea. But here's why I did it. Even amongst evangelical scholars, archaeologists, there is a 200-year span of time in which they have suggested the Exodus. Can you imagine? And that goes from the mid-15th century, that's the typical 1446 BC date that some people put on it. That's called the early date for the Exodus. And then there's that late date, about 200 years later, in the middle of the 13th century BC. So all the way from the reign of Thutmose III in the 15th century BC, all the way down to the time of Ramesses the Great in the 13th century BC, and virtually everything in between. These pharaohs, these time frames have been suggested for the time of the Exodus. The most popular of all these views among scholars is the late date. In the 13th century, during the reign of Yul Brynner. You see the movie? Yeah. But it always bothered me. Why? And this is a pivotal event, folks. I mean, it's big, right? This is all the Old and New Testament looks back to the Exodus as sort of that big peg, historical peg that everything flows from. Remember when you were in the land of Egypt, and I brought you out of the land of Egypt. And even in the New Testament it refers to these kinds of things, uses them as metaphors for our faith. I've delivered you, and the Passover, and all of that stuff, it comes out of the Exodus. So this is very important stuff. And it always bugged me that, well then, I can understand it if it's like Catholics versus Protestants or something, if there's some fundamental. No, amongst conservative evangelical scholars, there's this vast difference. Most of them are late date. A few are early date. And virtually nobody in the middle. In fact, I think I'm the first one to pop up in the middle. But it bothered me because I thought, wait a minute, there's a lot of information there. There's a lot going on there. I mean, 10 plagues, good grief, that's bad enough. That ought to be in the historical record. Where do we see that? Something ought to be there. Why can't we get scholars to agree on who's the Pharaoh of the Exodus? And then I discovered something. After I had read all of them, every single book ever written, every paper, everything on the Pharaoh of the Exodus, I discovered something. Not a single scholar who had ever written about the Pharaoh of the Exodus had ever asked the correct question. It bugs me when scholars don't do that, because if you're going to do research, if you're going to try to find things out, you better be a good question asker. You better ask the relevant, correct question, or you will not find the answer. And the relevant question I'm going to bring up in this presentation. And there is just one question about that. But it really bothered me that they didn't ask the question, and all they were doing was number crunching. Here's how they did it. By the way, there's a high, middle, and low Egyptian chronology. And at any point, the high and the low chronology are about 30 years apart, which is, a few thousand years ago. What's 30 years, right? And so it's not a big deal, but there's some high chronology, middle chronology, low chronology. And so, for example, the end of Tutmosis III's reign might be 1450, but the low one might be, what would it be? 1420. Okay, and there'd be one in the middle. So what's the difference? Now, so what you would do, here's how you would do it if you're a Bible guy. You would say, I picked my favorite Egyptian chronology. Pick the high, middle, or low. Pick one. Then I picked my favorite biblical chronology. Well, those who are the early date guys, like 1446, W.F. Albright, and the late date guys, they look at that 480 years in 1 Kings 6:1. Remember, it says that Solomon, in the 4th year of his reign, began to build the temple 480 years after the Israelites came out of Egypt. 480 years. And so he said, well, that 480 years is 12 times 40, right? 12 times 40, 480. That's a numerical symbolism for 12 generations. So 40 is an honorific generation. How long is a real generation? About 25. Okay. Till you have your kids grow up, have kids. Okay, so about 25. So W.F. Albright said, wait a minute, this is a numerical formula. This is not literal. This is a numerical formula. And so he said 12 times 40 is 480, but if we look at the real generations, 12 real generations is more like 300 years. So he goes 300 years back into the reign of Ramses the Great, Yul Brynner, and there you have the Pharaoh of the Exodus. That's how he did that. But what kind of procedure is this? It's not good exegesis, and it's not good history making. It's just not good at all, because it's just picking and choosing what you like. Well, you're not even dealing with the reasons why there's a high, middle, and low Egyptian chronology. You're not even dealing with why there's a high, middle, and low biblical chronology. And so look at the combinations there. Look at the combinations. What if you pick a high Egyptian chronology and a low biblical chronology, or high biblical chronology and a low Egyptian chronology? I mean, it's just all messed up. And so it can be way far apart. And if you're just 30 years off from the next guy, that could be one or two pharaohs difference. So I said, going to start from scratch by asking the right question. And by the way, there's the book, and that is not a picture of me. Yeah, looks like he's been in the tanning bed too long. Yeah. All right. So you find the Pharaoh of the Exodus by asking the right question. Here it is. And this is, you've got to lock in on this. if all of those terrible events that were associated with the Exodus actually happened, as the Bible describes them, what would have happened to Egypt? I mean, if you took those things and sort of scaled them up for any kingdom in the history of the world, and if those things happened to the United States of America, all that stuff, what would happen? Wouldn't fare very well, would it? I mean, those are terrible things. 10 plagues. Well, let's look at them. Here they are. 10 plagues. Well, okay, I've got this one in here. To answer that question, you got to study the history of the 18th dynasty. And aren't you really excited that we're going to cover today the entire history of the 18th dynasty of Egypt? I mean, you are not going to sleep tonight. You're going to be so excited. You're going to keep thinking about it all night long. But this is it. We're going to show you that the great collapse of the 18th dynasty actually can be tied to the exodus of Egypt. And so here are the, I think we're going to get these. Whoops. Now, whoa, I didn't ask the question. Where did it go? I hope my slides didn't get... Okay. Maybe they're going to come later. But here it is. Here's the history of the 18th dynasty. Now, here's how we're going to do this. And I've shortened this up today. I have a whole bunch of this that I do, but I've consolidated it down. Here are the power rankings. Now why power rankings? If you're going to rank a pharaoh, how powerful is a particular pharaoh? How do you do that? I mean, do we have like J.D. Power, Pharaoh rankings, something? No. You have to look at something else. The thing about the 18th dynasty is, and the reason I'm going to pick, you'll see why I pick it, not the 19th dynasty. The reason is because each pharaoh is trying to build an empire. Egypt never had an empire prior to the 18th dynasty. They just hung out in Egypt. They stayed there. But in the 18th dynasty, they pushed out and grabbed all the territory all the way up to the Euphrates River. Egypt expanded out of its borders to control everything that we know today as area of Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria. All that area controlled by Egypt in the 18th dynasty. So the power ranking is how solid of a hold did any given pharaoh have on that territory? If they had just sort of a minor hold, then I give them a low rank. If they had major ironclad control over that region, then I give them a real high ranking. And so this whole thing we're going to see right now juxtaposes each pharaoh in order through the 18th dynasty and where they rank in their empire building or the control of what has now become the Egyptian empire. Now, here's the Near East, and we have the Hyksos. Anybody heard of the Hyksos? Who are these people? These are Asiatic Semitic people, Canaanites from Canaan, who, for various reasons, wound up, a whole bunch of them migrated into Lower Egypt. By the way, isn't it confusing that Upper Egypt is in the south and Lower Egypt is in the north? That always bugs me because they're not going by, we think of north as up. No, it's going by the flow of the Nile, which flows from south in Africa, north into the Mediterranean. So Upper Egypt is upriver and Lower Egypt is downriver. So they took over Lower Egypt. In fact, one day they woke up, one morning, I think, 3 a.m. It always happens at 3 a.m., right? And they said, wait a minute, there's like 10 of us for every one native Egyptian. Why are they in control and we're not? I mean, it had to go something like that. Well, guess what? Next day, the Hyksos decided to take over. They took control of Egypt, and they controlled it for the next 150 years. Do you think that sat well with the Egyptians? That they had their whole, half their kingdom ripped away from them, being ruled by foreign rulers. The word Hyksos means rulers of foreign lands. And the Thebans were just down there in Thebes, just fuming. For about 150 years wanting to get rid of these people, and finally they did. So we're going to see that. But here's the Hyksos, and there's the Theban kingdom. Goes off the chart down there, but it's down to the south. And up there in the top, we have a kingdom you may have never heard of. What's really fun is I do this in Bible colleges and schools and seminaries and all these Bible scholars, and I show Mitanni, and they've never heard of it. Which immediately tells me they've never studied the ancient Near East, because Mitanni is a big deal. And they invented the chariot. Those people. Okay. Well, here's Mitanni kingdom in the north. Mostly they control the area of northern Mesopotamia over to the Mediterranean coast. Okay? That's their area. And then we have another kingdom down there, Assyria. You've heard of them from the Bible, but at this time in history, this goes all the way back to the Middle Bronze Age, in fact. At this time in history, Assyria is a vassal state of Mitanni, of the Mitanni kingdom. And then there's another player in the region, Hatti, the Hittites. Pat mentioned those. The Hittites, the kingdom of Het. In the Bible, Hittites are called, in the Hebrew, they're just sons of or men of Het. Chat or Hatti, the Hittites. And so here they are, and look how they are kind of landlocked up there in the high plateaus of central Anatolia. And they don't like it, by the way. They want access to the Mediterranean, because where's all the money? The sea trade, the Mediterranean trade. They want access to those northern coastal cities, but they can't get it because who's controlling it? Mitanni. Mitanni has it locked down all the way to the Mediterranean coast. So you can see that the Hittites are up there growing, getting stronger, but living in a lot of frustration because they can't access the world trade. They can only do that. By the way, why didn't they just go south, straight south to the Mediterranean? Because there's a huge mountain, Taurus mountain range there, and it's full of wild-eyed crazy barbarians and were fearsome barbarians, and they couldn't do that. You can't go through the mountains to establish any kind of a trade route because of these fearsome tribes there. So they're just landlocked. They're just stuck with the Black Sea up there. And what do you got in the Black Sea? Not much. So they're frustrated. So this sets the tone. By the way, the Hyksos period is the time of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. The Pharaoh that Joseph went to visit in Egypt is a Canaanite guy. He's an Amorite guy just like him, just like Abraham. When Joseph comes in and works for this, becomes second only to Pharaoh in Egypt, what Pharaoh is it? It's a Hyksos Pharaoh. It's the last reigning Hyksos Pharaoh probably. And not only that, how do we know that Joseph belongs during the Hyksos period? Because the Hyksos brought the chariot to Egypt. And there's no chariots in Egypt prior to the Hyksos period. That's just a fact. So Joseph is introduced to the Egyptian population how? By riding second chariot to the Pharaoh himself. So they rode through the land, announcing the vizier of Egypt. Here's the new vizier, Joseph, second in command. All right, well, here's the situation we're starting out. This is around, as the situation existed around 1600 BC, or maybe even the early 1500s BC in the time of Joseph. Now, also want to show you the power rankings of the kingdoms. Later we're going to do the power rankings of the pharaohs, as I showed you, but I want to show you these kingdoms. Number one power, the Hyksos Egyptians. And they control everything up into Canaan. See? The kingdom goes right up into Canaan. Number two, I guess they're all there already. Number two, Mitanni. Number three, the Hittites. And number four, Assyria. That's the power rankings in that order. Now, Now we're going to have the first Pharaoh. Who we got? Amenhotep the first. How did we get him? Whoa. Okay, Akhmosa. Why is he important? Because he is the Pharaoh who kicked the Hyksos out of Egypt. He finally, by the way, the archaeology here is so much fun. The previous king, the last king of the 17th dynasty, had tried to kick the Hyksos out of Egypt, and his mummy has a big sickle sword gash in his skull. Okay, didn't work. They got him. It didn't work. But Akhmosa was the first Egyptian pharaoh, and he starts a new dynasty. He kicks the Hyksos out of Egypt. He reunites Upper and Lower Egypt and starts to build the great Egyptian kingdom again. And so in this time, we still have Mitanni as number 2. And who's number 1? I can't read my slide there. But anyway, you can see it. And then we have something else. The next Pharaoh. And we're going to go through these pretty quickly. Don't worry about what's on the screen. Don't try to read all of that. I'll just kind of tell you what's happening. This is an old army buddy. This is not son. This is not son of Akhmosa. This is army buddy. So Akhmosa is putting the kingdom together. And so Amenhotep is doing the same thing. He's trying to put stuff back together. He's got to get what the Hyksos had controlled back under the economy of Egypt, and all of that's got to be worked out. So he's just building. He's just building. And so all good things come to an end. He dies, and then we get Thutmose the first. Now this is another army buddy. He gets to take it. This is not the son of the previous Pharaoh. This is just another army buddy, and he takes over as Pharaoh. And but things are stable by now. Things are stable. The kingdom's back together. The army's back together. The wealth is flowing. Everything's great. And I think one morning, it's always 3 a.m., he's lying on his bed, and Thutmose the first has a dream, or he has a thought. You know, everything's good. I think I want an empire. We got to go conquer some people. You know, we have the Super Bowl today and things like that. In the ancient world, it was warfare. And the Bible says, and we know this from antiquity, that the time of going to war in antiquity is when? The spring. Spring is a time of going to war. Why? You get all your planting in, you get all your agriculture, everything's set. Okay, now let's go beat up on people. And so off they go to their Super Bowl for that year. And so this is the way it goes. And so Thutmose the first says, I got to go beat up on some people. So where does he go? Well, he really only has one place to go. I mean, they get the Nubians in the south, and they're always kind of cooperative, but that's where all the Egyptian gold comes from, right? Nubians got so much gold down there, they didn't know what to do with it, so the Egyptians are taking it. And but the only way to go is north. I mean, you can go north and east into the Levant. You can go into Canaan. You can go into Syria. That's about it. So what does he do? He drives his armies all the way to the Euphrates River. And he sets up a big billboard, big stele, a big piece of rock up there. It says, I am Thutmose the first, king of the world. This is now the official northern border of my kingdom. And he claims it. But what did he just do? He just crossed into the territory of the Mitanni kingdom, and there's a flashpoint. Now he has to fight the Mitannis, and there's a few skirmishes that go on, but basically Mitanni just kind of hides over the hill, and as the Egyptians go to town by town, and here's the basic line. Go to a town, would you like to consider yourself a part of the Egyptian empire or perhaps die? And of course, what are you going to say? Oh yeah, we heard about you guys. Yeah, okay, we're good. And so they would just go. And so Thutmose the first thinks he's got it all nailed down. He thinks he's got him an empire. And so he leaves for home. These people love me, and I'm going to go home. Well, guess what? As soon as he's over the horizon, they're all watching. Okay, he's gone. Okay, here come the Mitannis back. And the Mitannis say, you did what? And they said, nah, we're kidding. We really love you. We're still in your court. We're happy. So by the time Tutmosis I gets his army back home, the whole northern thing it's in his head. I mean, it's more of the kingdom, the empire is more an imagination than it is a reality. So anyway, that's the situation with Tutmosis I. Well, he dies, and his son. Now we're going to go father-son. For the rest of the dynasty, father-son. So here's the son, Tutmosis II. And Tutmosis II does the same thing. He's trying to send armies up, and he's trying to control the area, but same thing. I mean, unless you stay up there with a big army and really reinforce it, they're just basically making a show and going back home, and the Mitannis are coming back and taking the... they just want the corridor to the sea. They want that Mediterranean trade. By the way, Egypt has contact with the Mediterranean, so they don't ever have a problem with that. So, but here's the problem. Tutmosis II has a little wife. Her name is Hatshepsut. And little Hatshepsut is not interested in being the queen. She's not interested in being what's called the God's wife, right? Pharaoh's God, so you're the God's wife. She wants to be Pharaoh. Not queen. She wants to be Pharaoh of Egypt. And so, interestingly enough, Tutmosis II dies a little prematurely. She's probably slipping a little glass in his oatmeal from time to time, to kind of facilitate the process. And he dies. Well, and she's got this all worked out because the crown prince, when her husband dies, is only 5 years old. So if the crown prince is only 5 years old, she has now the excuse that I will be his guardian and I will rule administratively Egypt in his stead. But she's not happy just kind of ruling. She has monuments built, has a big mortuary temple built for herself. She starts a big project. She shows herself on the monuments with the beard and the male clothing, right? I mean, she depicts herself as the king, as Pharaoh, not as a queen. Now, little Tut 3 is in their nursery having a good time, and he's totally unaware of all of this. Doesn't care. But eventually, by the time he reaches puberty, by the time he hits, say, age 14 or 15 for sure, he does what every crown prince gets to do. You become the commander of the Egyptian northern army of Amun-Ra, the army responsible for subduing the territories in the north. So, by around 15, he becomes known as the conqueror of Canaan and Syria, right? And how long does Hatshepsut reign? 20 years. Now stop and think. There have been pharaohs who've come to the throne when they're 12 years old and began to rule immediately. So think of Tutmosis III. He, at 5, wasn't ready to rule, but Queen, it's not his mother, it's his aunt, Hatshepsut, is on the throne in Egypt, ruling Egypt, and he's the commander of the northern army. He's bivouacked with his troops up there somewhere in Canaan and Syria, and at 3 a.m., in his tent, on his cot, he has this thought. I'm sure this is exactly the way it happened. I'm 25 years old. I'm the Pharaoh of Egypt. What am I doing up here? Auntie Hatshepsut's down there ruling Egypt for 20 years, and I'm up here doing what? You know what the next thing we know in the history of Egypt? The next thing we know, now, and nobody knows who did it, but it doesn't take much of a brain to figure it out. The next thing we know, Hatshepsut is dead. All of her images and names on the monuments are being hacked off, just chopped off, the stones being carved off. She's being erased as much as possible from history. And Tutmosis III is on the throne. Now, thankfully for my buddy, and I call him my buddy because he's my favorite Pharaoh of all time, he is the greatest, most powerful, wealthiest Pharaoh in the history of Egypt. Nobody, Ramses the Great, nothing compared to Tutmosis III. He is the greatest Pharaoh in the history of Egypt. He has more territory, has more land, has more money, has more everything than anybody else. This is the pinnacle of Egypt. And I'm happy for him because he's going to rule for the next 34 years all by himself. Thankfully, he lives old enough to actually enjoy being Pharaoh for a while, because a lot of these guys die fairly young. So here he is now. He's Pharaoh. Everything's great, powerful, and his control over the Asiatic provinces is iron fist. Why? Because he lived up there for a long, long time. He knows the situation, probably knows all the kings by name. So he's got it all in control. But, oh yes, all good things must come to an end. Who we got up there now? Okay, Amenhotep II, right guy. Son of Tut III. But Tutmosis III, smart guy, he brings Amenhotep onto the throne as co-regent for the last 10 years of his life. Pretty smart, huh? You want to have nice, smooth transition, none of this hot Chepset stuff. You want to have nice, smooth transition to the next king. And so, and it also allows you as the old guy, right? You can just complain and point stuff out. We used to do it this way. I wouldn't do it that way. And just let your son rule. And so he's just having a good time. And all good things do come to an end. And guess what? Oh, by the way, it was typical when a pharaoh died. Now think of being a Syrian king or a Canaanite king, and you got your. And so when Egypt is in control, when you're under the thumb of Egypt, what are you doing? You're taking your best commodities, wine and olive oil, and you're giving it to Egypt in tribute. They're not paying for it. So you're not making much money. You're just pumping this stuff into Egypt, and they're getting it for free, and it's not a good situation. So what do you suppose every city-state in Canaan and Syria does when they hear that a pharaoh has died? They rebel. They kill the local Egyptian governor. You know, they just throw off the Egyptian yoke. They did this when Tutmosis III died. And Amenhotep II got wind of it. Of course he did. He's reconnoitering the whole place all the time. What does he do? Now, Tutmosis III was a man of finesse. Man of finesse. I mean, he just was a terrific ruler. He's fair. But Amenhotep II is a thug, by his own admission. He had a composite bow built so strong that he says, I'm the only one that can pull my bow. Nobody else can pull my bow. And you have his mummy. He's the widest of all the mummies of the 18th dynasty. He's a hulking guy. And he's a tough guy. He's a thug. When he finds He takes his army and he goes north. He puts a parallel flotilla coming up the Mediterranean. He's going up there to Syria to find all of these kings. He picks 7 of them, that's what he says. 7 Syrian kings who have fomented rebellion against him. He finds them. He captures them. He takes them all to the coast, ties them to the prow of his ship, keeps them alive, fed and watered, all the way down to Thebes, to Luxor, gives them, puts them in confinement, feeds them well, plumps them up, gives them back on a day of celebration, gives them back their regalia, their royal regalia. And he brings them one by one into the temple at Luxor. And personally, Amenhotep II, by his own hand with his own sickle sword, lops off, one at a time, lops the head off of every one of them. This is the king. He didn't hire an executioner. He did it personally. King before me, whop, 7 times. Next one, whop, has their bodies cut into little pieces. Has little cuneiform tablets in Akkadian, so they'd understand it, written and tied to those body parts, and he has these distributed all over the Asiatic territories. The little tablet says, this is what happens when you mess with Amenhotep II. Guess how many rebellions he had for the rest of, pretty much for the rest of the 18th dynasty. They remembered that, and nobody messed with them. So that pretty much ended all of that. Well, all good things come to an end. And then we have this guy, Thutmose IV. Now remember, up to now, every time the Egyptians poked their army into the northern Levant, they had to butt heads with the Mitannis. And Thutmose IV looked at this situation, and for the first time, we have a diplomatic thought in the mind of an Egyptian king. He thought, wait a minute, this is costing us a lot of money to keep this thing going. Why don't we just make a deal with the Mitannis? We'll send them a bunch of gold, and they can send me a princess, and we'll all be happy family, and they can recognize our border at the Euphrates River, and as their brother partner in the covenant, we'll give them total access to the Mediterranean like they want. Win-win. That's what he did. However, Egypt had been negotiating for about 100 years with both Mitanni and the Hittites. Who would they sign a treaty with? The Hittites wanted that northern Levantine area, but they couldn't get it because of Mitanni. Hittites were hoping they could sign a treaty with the Egyptians, which would lock Mitanni out and give the Hittites access to the Mediterranean trade. What just happened? Thutmose IV sided with Mitanni and cut the Hittites out. Before that ink was dry on that treaty, the Hittites were now the sworn enemy of Egypt. And they were seething, and Suppiluliuma, by the king, the great warrior king of the Hittites, remember that name, Suppiluliuma, best dog name ever, right? You call him Suppi. Suppiluliuma was bound and determined someday to take by force what they've taken from me. And so we have the Mitanni, Egypto-Mitannian alliance. So everything's all huggy-kissy between Mitanni and the Egyptians. And now between the power of Mitanni and the combined power of Egypt, Hittites are high and dry and angry. Well, number 1 power is Egypt. Number 2 power is Mitanni. Number 3 power is the Hittites, and we still have that arrangement going on. And this is the first international alliance Egypt ever made. That's why Redford and others and Reeves, Egyptologists, have called Thutmose IV the greatest pharaoh in the history of Egypt, arguably. Now, he's not as great, powerful, and lengthy a reign as Thutmose III, his grandfather, but he's the first one to do a brilliant maneuver to keep from having to fight all the time and spend all the money up in the northern territories. So everything is great. Everything is wonderful except one thing. All good things come to an end, right? For some reason, Thutmose IV died young. We only have documentation for year 8, nothing higher. So most, like Kenneth Kitchen and others, give him 8 to 10 years. That's all. But we have his mummy. In fact, he's the best identified of all the 18th dynasty mummies. He's young, between 25 and 30 years of age. He's handsome, well coiffed, beautiful manicure. He's got big rings in his ears. Healthy, no pathogens, no wounds on the body, young, healthy, good looking, dead. When you're dead, all those other things really don't matter a whole lot. So there he is, dead. Why is he dead? Well, let's look what happened after that. When he died, his son, Amenhotep III was only 12 years old. Pop didn't live very long. And I want to show you what happened. As soon as we get into the reign of Amenhotep III, the very next Pharaoh, who's number one? Hatti. Mitanni has slipped to number 2. Egypt is now 3rd. Wait a minute. What just happened? Amenhotep III withdrew all the troops from Syria and Canaan. He let the Asiatic territories go. The empire evaporated almost overnight. It had become a custom through many generations now for Egypt to control this territory, and all of a sudden, he let it go. And what we say is, he would have controlled it if he could have controlled it, but he couldn't. So he let it go. And why couldn't he? We'll come back to that. Something happened after the death of his father that Amenhotep couldn't control. And by the way, Amenhotep III was 12 years old and didn't want to be Pharaoh, had no idea about being Pharaoh, didn't want to. And who ruled for the first half of his reign? Who really administered Egypt? His mama. Queen Mutemuia, remember the Mitanni princess that T4 took in that negotiation? That's his mother. His mother, Mutemuia, who's Indo-European Mitanni, rules Egypt for about half of his reign. And when she dies, his wife, A3's wife, Queen Tia, rules for the rest of his reign. And what he does, he moves his palace across the river, actually to the Valley of the King's side of the river, which is really weird. And he builds his palace, and he builds a big lake out in front of his palace, and he builds a party bark, right? And so he spends most of his reign spending money building monuments to himself, because Egypt had lots of money. The Nubian gold never dried up. And so he could do that, but he's partying. So he's having a party out on the lake. By the way, any Star Wars fans? Come on, admit it, okay? In Star Wars, there's a perfect character that is a dead ringer for Amenhotep III. Jabba the Hutt. Got him? That's Amenhotep III. Just hanging out on his barge, having a party. And so what's happening? Egypt is dying from plagues. It's being disrupted. They've lost their northern empire completely. And he's just trying to stiff upper lip. Build lots of stuff. Oh, yeah, we're fine. Oh, we're good. Yeah, but it wasn't good. It wasn't good. Egypt is collapsing around his ears, and he knows it. 38 years. He rules for a long time, 38 years. But during that 38 years, here's what happened. Watch this. During the reign of Amenhotep III, remember Mitanni and Egypt were linked, controlling the whole area? During the reign of Amenhotep III, Suppiluliuma, remember him? Suppiluliuma took his Hittite army, crossed the Euphrates River, and crushed and burned Washukani, the Mitanni capital, to the ground. Whoa. And he did it with impunity, without any fear of Egyptian reprisal whatsoever. He now was going to take by force what he had been refused by having a treaty with Egypt, and he was angry, and he destroys the Mitanni capital, and Mitanni is reduced to a vestige of its former self. And by the way, 20 years from right now, from this, Suppi's going to return. And he's going to wipe it out, all of it. Going to run it into the ground. Now, what do the Hittites have? Now the Hittites have what they always wanted. They've got control of the northern Levantine coast, and they have entered the Mediterranean economic world. And they are happy, happy people. Now, Suppiluliuma is not interested in the southern half of the Levant. He couldn't care less about Canaan. Let the Egyptians have it if they want it. I don't care. I want what I want, and that's the Mediterranean access coastal areas. So he's got it now. With Mitanni now taken down, Assyria now is right. Remember, they were a vassal state. Now Assyria is rising, and they are quickly going to become the old Assyrian Empire. And, of course, they're going to wind up butting heads with Mitanni, but that's off our story. And so this is the situation. Now look at this. This is still in the reign of Amenhotep III. Hatti is number 1. Assyria is number 2. Egypt might be number 3. And Mitanni's hanging on by a fingernail. And they're about to be wiped out completely. So, here we are. Now we're in the time of Akhenaten. If Thutmose IV is Pharaoh of the Exodus, Joshua's conquest of Canaan would start in the 2nd year of Akhenaten, 40 years later. And as we'll see, the Amarna texts, which talk about the Habiru disrupting cities and towns in Canaan, exactly what Joshua was doing, are written during that period of time. So it's amazing there. Now, what do we got? Oh, we got a couple of guys coming in. After Akhenaten dies, then we have a couple of pharaohs within 2 years. I mean, it's so disrupted that we really can't tell much what's going on. But then this guy comes along. You ever heard of him? Tutankhamun, King Tut, the famous King Tut, who's been all over the world touring with all of his stuff, right? And so here he is. But he dies young. Boy king dies young, no children. Now, this is going to be the strangest thing. Remember, Egypt has lost its empire since after the death of Thutmose IV. Amenhotep III didn't do anything to regain it, and Akhenaten is completely powerless. Egypt is continuing to collapse. All scholars know that the plagues that have been in Egypt for a generation and a half are still there. Still there. And so Egypt is about ready to die. But when he dies, when King Tut dies, he has no children, his little wifey, God's wife, her name is Ankh-Esenamun. This is the weirdest thing I can ever find in the history of Egypt. This is really, really weird stuff. Remember, this is Egypt. Nobody conquers Egypt. Nobody messes with Egypt. They're so far away from everybody, and nobody cares, really. And so, but now we have the wife of the dead King Tut writing a letter to Suppiluliuma, the great warrior king of the Hittites. The Hittites are the sworn enemy of Egypt. She's writing a letter to the enemy king of the Hittites. And here's what she said. Let me quote the letter. Dear Suppi. Okay, I made that up. Dear Suppi, my husband has died. And by the way, why is her letter important? Because in Egypt, always, it is the wife, the God's wife of the Pharaoh that just died. She is the one who will legitimize the throne of the next Pharaoh. If she has no daughters, then the next Pharaoh has to marry her. Thankfully, hopefully it's not your mother, right? So, but if she has a daughter, then that will solidify. So you have to marry either the next Pharaoh has to marry either the God's wife or the daughter of the God's wife. That legitimizes your throne. So she has the power to do what she says she can do. She says, Dear Suppi, my husband has died. We have no sons. I hear you have many sons. If you will send one of your sons to be my husband, I shall make him the Pharaoh of Egypt. What? Egypt, the queen of Egypt, is offering her kingdom to Suppiluliuma as a vassal state. I'll become your vassal. Just save me. Because Egypt is in a bad state of affairs. It's about ready to go toast. So she writes him. Now, Suppiluliuma gets the letter. We have it in the Hittite archives. And Mursili, too, his son, records the reaction of his father upon the reception of this letter. He's storming through the palace, pounding himself with his fists on his forehead, going, what are they trying to pull? Nothing like this has ever happened in my whole life. I mean, who offers you like a whole major kingdom like for free? What's happening here? So he gets his envoys together and he says, go to Egypt and check this out. Go on. This can't be real. So the envoy goes down to Egypt. And by the way, what's going on to Egypt still? Still plagues, disease. They go down to Egypt, guess what they catch? They don't know it, but they contract the bug, okay? And so they're down there, and they get an audience with Queen Ankhesenamun. And they ask her, is this real? And she gets really angry. She says, yes. And she writes a letter to Suppiluliuma. The second letter, we have that too. Starts out like this. I said, and she quotes the previous letter. My husband has died. We have no sons. Send me your son. And so his envoys come back to Hattusis, and they say to Suppiluliuma, man, it's the real deal. Egypt is hurting, and they're bad. She's offering you Egypt on a gold platter. I mean, here it is. Take it. So he says, okay, line my sons up. So he has a whole bunch of sons, right? He goes, Kind of reminds me of Samuel and the sons of Jesse, right? You got any more sons? None of these guys. So he's going through, no, not you. And I think he picks the one that's the most irritating, rebellious son that he's got, right? It's like, yeah, Zedanza, you're going. Z, you're out of here. So off he goes. And so the whole envoy takes Zedanza, marches him down to Egypt, and then the plot thickens. This make a great movie. So the plot thickens. As soon as the envoy and Zedanza starts to cross the border into Egypt, he's assassinated. So now Zedanza, the son of Suppiluliuma, is dead. Well, now the word gets back to Suppiluliuma. What do you think he's going to do? He already knows by all this reconnoitering that Egypt can't do anything about it. If he attacks Egypt, they're not going to do anything. He can take it by force. So he's already controlling all that land down to the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon. He just says, get my troops together. We're marching on Egypt. We're going to take Egypt by force. And so he gets everything ready to march. But guess what? They can't march. Why? Because they've contracted the plagues from Egypt. They're sick. They can't march. Isn't it interesting? If the very plagues that God put on Egypt that caused Pharaoh to say, get out of Dodge, I'm letting your people go. The same plagues that brought Pharaoh down are the same plagues that's now going to save Egypt's neck from the Hittites. That's kind of an irony, isn't it? So they can't march, and on and on. Well, all those stories are fun, and then Horemheb comes along, and he hates Akhenaten, and he hates King Tut, who he works for, and I'm just going to go out here and get past all of this. But the bottom line is, oh, come on, go. There we go. The biblical events that happened around the time of the Exodus would have caused a dynastic collapse. And in that whole, remember, 200-year spread that's been suggested for the time of the Exodus, how many dynastic collapses happened within that entire stretch of time? One. Look for the collapse, and you've got your Exodus Pharaoh. All right, here they are. It makes perfect sense that the decline and collapse of the 18th dynasty as a result of those 5 core events, I call them the 5 core events of the Exodus story, that it would have brought about collapse. And here they are. I knew they were going to come up someday. 10 plagues, like one thing. Plundering of wealth. Remember, they plundered the Egyptians, gold and silver and cloth. Loss of labor. Oh, Egypt, in the Exodus, Egypt lost a massive labor force. Loss of military. Remember, they drowned. The Egyptians only had one army, really. The northern army of Amun-Ra. And they drowned. They lost their military. Not only that, they lost Pharaoh. The Bible's very clear that Pharaoh died in the sea. He didn't get to come back like in the movie. He died in the... Well, see, and people say, well, wait a minute. If Pharaoh died in the Yam Suf, in the sea, with his troops, how do we have his mummy? And the answer to that question is very simple. If you're going to do biblical archaeology, read the Bible. If you read the text, it says, the next morning after that event, all the bodies of the Egyptians washed up on the shore. The Egyptians would have drowned 1,000 slaves going after the drowned body of their Pharaoh. Why? Because if you don't bury the Pharaoh properly according to the Egyptian Book of the Dead and go through all the procedures and removal of the organs and all of that stuff and, turning them into beef jerky and all that stuff, if you don't go through that, then bad things happen to Egypt. It was a religious thing. It was a thing that they firmly believed. So they got his body, they took him back to Egypt, they prepped him, and there he is, young, handsome, healthy, and dead. That's our Pharaoh. Well, when you consider that there's only one dynastic collapse during the 18th and 19th dynasties until way late in the 19th dynasty, which is almost down through the Iron Age, here it is. I'm going to go this real fast. First Pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. This is our power rankings of Pharaoh and how much control they have over the empire. Little bit, a lot. Tutmosis III is going to come in here. And then Amenhotep II, Tutmosis III. But now watch what happens. Boom, boom, boom. They lost the empire. That's the dynastic collapse. If you put the Exodus right there in the events, it explains that precipitous decline and collapse of the 18th dynasty. It went away. That's it. By the way, watch this. This is even more dramatic. Look at this. In the time of Tutmosis IV, Egypt is number 1. Mitanni is number 2. Hittites are number 3. Syria is number 4. Watch what happens in that shift of that one Pharaoh. One Pharaoh. Look at that. The whole international scene changed. Now Hati's number 1. Assyria's number 2. Egypt is number 3. And Mitanni's wiped off the face of the earth. What just happened? The Exodus just happened. That's it. Well, there it is. You'd predict it, and the guy that's responsible for that upon his death, and I'm not going to go through all these quotes. These are quotes from other scholars. I like them, but they're basically saying, hey, they're just confirming all of this. By the way, all these quotes come from a book called The 5 Views of the Exodus. And these scholars are arguing back and forth, and they're all making my point. So I call the book The 5 Erroneous Views of the Exodus, and they need to put the right one in there. All right, there they are. Now, Joshua then comes into the land to conquer in the 2nd year of Akhenaten. And I have a whole lot to say about that, but we don't have time. So if you want to chat about that in the chat time after lunch or at lunch, then we'll do that. But anyway, there it is. The history is clean and clear. The Exodus occurred. And this is how we get the Bible and archaeology going together. The Bible and the archaeology can talk, can't they? Scholars were never able to explain the colossal collapse of the 18th dynasty. Seemed to be no reason for it whatsoever, except there were some plagues, but they never put 2 and 2 together. But when we let the Bible talk and the archaeology and the Bible talk together, all of a sudden we have a perfect reason. we have a cause and effect relationship between Near East history and biblical history, and the events of the Exodus caused the collapse of the great and mighty 18th Egyptian dynasty. End of story. Well, not. There's a lot more. But that's where we're going to keep it for today. All right, thank you.